Hi, everybody. Good evening. How are you doing? Today, I'm going to make this presentation on nuclear power plant accident. We had already seen about the Fukushima Dai-Ichi nuclear power plant accident, but there are so many nuclear power plant accidents in the world. So I suggest that you also make research on that. Today, I'm going to show you about the Russian, American, and English nuclear power plant accident. So let's get started. The keywords are nuclear power plant, Chernobyl, and 3 miles. And first of all, I have to tell you about the Chernobyl, about the nuclear plant attack by the Russians to Ukraine, because Ukraine has a lot of big nuclear power plant, and Russia attacked yesterday one of the most, the biggest nuclear power plant of Europe, that is in near Chernobyl. Not so near, it is in the southern part of Ukraine. So let's take a look at that. So I watched this in the video of the Independent. And the video says, Zelensky, the president of the Ukraine, Zelensky warns nuclear plant attack could cause catastrophe for all of Europe. You know the word Chernobyl. So this is a very recent accident, in an incident that reminded the world how Vladimir Putin's decision to invade Ukraine could trigger multiple crises far beyond the borders of Ukraine. Officials said that the training building at the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, was on fire following a Russian attack. In a message released in the early hours of Friday morning in Ukraine today, President Volodymyr Zelensky said the incident had the capacity to threaten the continent. You know the word Chernobyl, he said grimly. Shortly afterwards, it was reported that US President Joe Biden had spoken to his Ukrainian counterpart about the incident. It's a very serious problem. And this is Ukraine. This is a map of Ukraine with the main cities. Here is Kyiv, the capital city. And this location of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is here in red, here. Here is Crimea. So it's so stupid to attack a nuclear power plant, because it is just like creating a nuclear bomb. It's so dangerous. So let's see at this announcement of IAEA. On Thursday, IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency member states passed a resolution calling on Russia to cease actions against nuclear facilities in Ukraine, diplomats said. The resolution, which was led by Canada and Poland, and supported by 26 other countries, deplored Russia's aggressive activity and attacks against nuclear sites in Ukraine, and seizing and taking control of nuclear facilities. The British ambassador in Vienna, Corinne Kitzel, said, "Only Russia and China voted against the resolution, according to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic. China also has so many nuclear power plants, so dangerous. It's the not first nuclear reaction under threat from the Russian invasion. On the first day of the assault, Russian forces seized control of the Chernobyl power plant in northern Ukraine, the site of the world's worst nuclear disaster, according to Ukrainian officials." So at the time of the accident of Chernobyl, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. And after this union, Ukraine became to be independent from the Soviet Union, and Ukraine was going to join NATO. And that's why Putin got very angry and began this movement of attack to the Ukraine, and especially nuclear power plants. The Chernobyl nuclear power plant reactor exploded in 1986 when Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, sparking a disaster that affected directly or indirectly 9 million people due to radioactive materials released into the atmosphere. The IAEA said Ukraine had informed it that staff held at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant since Russian military forces took control of the site a week ago were facing psychological pressure and moral exhaustion, according to an IAEA statement. In a joint appeal to the International Nuclear Watchdog, the Ukrainian government, regulatory authority, and national operator said staff at the facility must be allowed to rest and rotate so that their crucial work can be carried out safely and securely. But fortunately, Ukrainian nuclear power plant fire extinguished. And as Zelensky condemns Russia's attack. This is the news of CNN today, after the attack of Russians to the another nuclear power plant of Zaporizhzhia. The IAEA on Friday said via Twitter that it had put its incident and emergency center in full 24/7 response mode due to serious situation. Both US President Joe Biden and British Prime Minister Boris Johnson discussed the situation in separate calls with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky early Friday. Just today, according to statements from London and Washington, the leaders called for Russia to cease military activities and allow full access to emergency workers. Johnson will seek an emergency United Nations Security Council meeting in the coming hours, and the United Kingdom will raise the issue immediately with Russia and close partners, the British statement said. Details are in this video of CNN. So now let's go to the Chernobyl accident of 1986 to understand why it was so serious. This was updated May 2021 with new data. The Chernobyl accident in 1986 was the result of a flawed reactor design that was operated with inadequately trained personnel. The resulting steam explosion and fires released at least 5% of the radioactive reactor core into the environment, with the deposition of radioactive materials in many parts of Europe. 2 Chernobyl plant workers died due to the explosion on the night of the accident, and a further 28 people died within a few weeks as a result of acute radiation syndrome. The United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation has concluded that apart from some 5,000 thyroid cancers, resulting in 15 fatalities, there is no evidence of a major public health impact attributable to radiation exposure 20 years after the accident. Some 350,000 people were evacuated as a result of the accident, but the resettlement of areas from which people were relocated is ongoing still now. And the Chernobyl is here in the northern country of Ukraine. And the another attacked nuclear power plant is around here in southern Ukraine. And here is Pripyat, a city where the workers' family was living. The April 1986 disaster at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine was the product of a flawed Soviet reactor design coupled with serious mistakes made by the plant operators. It was a direct consequence of Cold War isolation and the resulting lack of any safety culture. So Ukraine is surrounded by Russia, Belarus, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Moldova. So many countries that will be damaged by the accident of Chernobyl. And if something bad happens at this another nuclear power plant in southern Ukraine, it will be worse because this one is bigger than the Chernobyl. So now let's see about the Chernobyl. The accident destroyed the Chernobyl 4 reactor. It killed 30 operators and firemen within 3 months and several further deaths later. 1 person was killed immediately and a second died in hospital soon after as a result of injuries received. Another person is reported to have died at the time from a coronary thrombosis. Acute radiation syndrome, ARS, was originally diagnosed in 237 people on site and involved with the cleanup, and it was later confirmed in 134 cases. On these, 28 people died as a result of acute radiation syndrome within a few weeks of the accident. 19 more workers subsequently died between 1987 and 2004, but their death cannot necessarily be attributed to radiation exposure only. So we now, let's take a look at the radiation effects at the Chernobyl. Nobody off-site suffered from acute radiation effects although a significant but uncertain fraction of the thyroid cancers diagnosed since the accident in patients who were children at the time are likely to be due to intake of radioactive iodine fallout. Furthermore, large areas of Belarus, Ukraine, Russia, and beyond were contaminated in varying degrees. The Chernobyl disaster was a unique event in the only accident in the history of commercial nuclear power where radiation-related fatalities occurred. The design of the reactor is unique, and in that respect, the accident is thus of little relevance to the rest of the nuclear industry outside the then Eastern Bloc. However, it led to major changes in safety culture in the industry cooperation, particularly between East and West before the end of the Soviet Union. Former President Gorbachev said that the Chernobyl accident was a more important factor in the fall of the Soviet Union than perestroika, his program of liberal reform. So now let's study about the Chernobyl site. The Chernobyl power complex, lying about 130 kilometers north of Kyiv, Ukraine, and about 20 kilometers south of the border with Belarus, consisted of our nuclear reactors of 4 nuclear reactors of the RBMK 1000 design. Units 1 and 2 were constructed between 1970 and 1977, while units 3 and 4 of the same design were completed in 1983. 2 more RBMK reactors were under construction at the site at the time of the accident. To the southeast of the plant, an artificial lake of some 22 square kilometers, situated beside the river Pripyat, a tributary of the Dnieper, was constructed to provide cooling water for the reactors. So usually, reactors are constructed at the side of waters, or in seaside, or in riverside. In this case, is at the site at the riverside of River Pripyat. This area of Ukraine is described as Belarusian-type woodland with a low population density, about 3 kilometers away from the reactor. In the new city Pripyat, there were 49,000 inhabitants. The old town of Chernobyl, which had a population of 12,500, is about 15 kilometers to the southeast of the complex. Within a 30-kilometer radius of the power plant, the total population was between 115,000 and 135,000 at the time of the accident. This is the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. This is the control rods, this, and this is the biological shield. This is the turbine. This is the condenser. This is the pump to drive the water. And this is the steam separator. And these are the pressure tubes, these tubes, and fuel bundles, these fuel bundles. This is the reactor type RBMK 1000. And this part is filled with the graphite moderator to stop the neutron, the chain reaction of the neutron. In Japan, the moderator is usually light water. tap water. But here in Chernobyl, it was not water. It was graphite moderator. It's a little bit dangerous. The RBMK-1000, this type of reactor of Chernobyl. This is a Soviet-designed and built graphite-moderated pressure tube type reactor using slightly enriched 2% uranium-235 uranium dioxide fuel, and it is a boiling light water reactor with 2 loops feeding steam directly to the turbines without an intervening heat exchanger. Water pumped to the bottom of the fuel channels boils as it progresses up the pressure tubes, producing steam which feeds 500 megawatts of turbines. The water acts as a coolant and also provides the steam used to drive the turbines. The vertical pressure tubes contain the zirconium alloy-clad uranium dioxide fuel, around which the cooling water flows. The extensions of the fuel channels penetrate the lower plate and the cover plate of the core and are welded to each. A specially designed refueling machine allows fuel bundles to be changed without shutting down the reactor. And how was the safety systems of the reactor at Chernobyl? The moderator, the function of which is to slow down neutrons to make them more efficient in producing fission in the fuel, is graphite, as I said, surrounding the pressure tubes. A mixture of nitrogen and helium is circulated between the graphite blocks to prevent oxidation of the graphite and to improve the transmission of the heat produced by neutron interactions in the graphite to the fuel channel. The core itself is about 7 meters high and about 20 meters in diameter. In each of the 2 loops, there are 4 main coolant circulating pumps, one of which is always on standby. The reactivity or power of the reactor is controlled by raising or lowering 211 control rods, which, when lowered into the moderator, absorb neutrons and reduce the fission rate. The power output of this reactor is 3,200 megawatts thermal or 1,000 megawatts. Various safety systems such as an emergency core cooling system were incorporated into the reactor design. And there was a positive void coefficient inside that. One of the most important characteristics of the RBMK reactor is that it can possess a positive void coefficient, where an increase in steam bubbles, voids, is accompanied by an increase in core reactivity. As steam production in the fuel channels increases, the neutrons that would have been absorbed by the denser water now produce increased fission in the fuel. There are other components that contribute to the overall power coefficient of reactivity, but the void coefficient is the dominant one in RBMK reactors. The void coefficient depends on the composition of the core. A new RBMK core will have a negative void coefficient. However, at the time of the accident at Chernobyl 4, the reactor's fuel burn-up, control rod configuration, and power level led to a positive void coefficient large enough to overwhelm all other influences on the power coefficient. So, what was the immediate impact of the Chernobyl accident? The accident caused the largest uncontrolled radioactive release into the environment ever recorded for any civilian operation. And large quantities of radioactive substances were released into the air for about 10 days. This caused serious social and economic disruption for large populations in Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine. 2 radionuclides, the short-lived iodine-131 and the long-lived cesium-137, were particularly significant for the radiation dose they delivered to members of the public. About the iodine-131 and cesium-137, we saw on the lecture on Fukushima Dai-Ichi accident. It is estimated that all of the xenon gas, about half of the iodine and cesium, and at least 5% of the remaining radioactive material in the Chernobyl 4 reactor core, which had 192 tons of fuel, was released in the accident. So bigger than the Fukushima Dai-Ichi accident. Most of the released material was deposited close by us as dust and debris, but the lighter material was carried by wind over Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, and to some extent over Scandinavia and Europe. So now let's see about the acute radiation syndrome, ARS. The casualties included firefighters who attended the initial fires on the roof of the turbine building. All these were put out in a few hours, but radiation doses on the first day caused 28 deaths, 6 of which were firemen, by the end of July 1986. The doses received by the firefighters and power plants workers were high enough to result in acute radiation syndrome, which occurs in a person if a person is exposed to more than 700 milligrays within a short time frame, usually minutes. Common acute radiation syndrome symptoms include gastrointestinal problems, for example, nausea, vomiting, headaches, burns, and fever. Whole body dose between 4,000 milligrays and 5,000 milligrays within a short time frame would kill 50% of those exposed, with 8,000 to 10,000 milligrays universally fatal. The doses received by the firefighters who died were estimated to range up to 20,000 milligray. So milligray is another unit for the radiation. We'll study about that after this slide, okay? So now let's see about the cleaning up of the radioactivity at Chernobyl. In Japan, acceptable value is 1 millisievert per year for a normal person. The next task was cleaning up the radioactivity at the site so that the remaining 3 reactors could be restarted and the damaged reactor shielded more permanently. About 200,000 people, called liquidators, from all over the Soviet Union were involved in the recovery and cleanup during 1986 and 1987. They received high doses of radiation, averaging around 100 millisieverts. And this is the limit of IAEA or WHO for one person lifetime, the dose of 100 millisieverts. It's the upper threshold of radiation. And per year, it is limited to 1 millisievert per year, at least in Japan. For workers, it's 100 millisieverts. It's the same human, but it's different. Some 20,000 liquidators received about 250 millisieverts, with a few receiving approximately 500 millisieverts. And the WHO puts the limit for lifetime 100 millisievert. So this is very high. Later, the number of liquidators swelled to over 600,000, but most of these received only low radiation doses. The highest doses were received by about 1,000 emergency workers and on-site personnel during the first day of the accident. So even so, it is very high radiation. According to the most up-to-date estimate provided by the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation, the average radiation dose due to the accident received by inhabitants of strict radiation control areas, population 260,000, in the years 1986 to 2005, was 31 millisieverts over the 20-year period. And in the contaminated areas, population 6.4 million, it averaged 9 millisieverts, a minor increase over the dose due to background radiation over the same period, about 50 millisievert. So at the beginning and to the liquidators that were very near the epicenter of the accident, the doses of radiation were very high. So now let's see about the radiation exposure in Chernobyl. Initial radiation exposure in contaminated areas was due to short-lived iodine-131. This is only 8 days. Later, cesium-137, half-life of 30 days, was the main hazard. Both are fission products dispersed from the reactor core with half-lives of 8 days and 30 years, respectively, as I said. And 1.8 electron becquerel of iodine-131 and 0.085 becquerel of cesium-137 were released. About 5 million people lived in areas of Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine contaminated above 37 kilobecquerel per square meter cesium-137 in soil. And about 4,000 lived in more contaminated areas of strict control by authorities, above 555 kilobecquerels per square meter cesium-137. A total of 29,400 square kilometers was contaminated above 180 kilobecquerel per square meter. The plant operator's town of Pripyat was evacuated on 27 April, 45,000 residents. By 14 May, some 160,000 people that had been living within a 30-kilometer radius had been evacuated and later relocated. About 1,000 of these returned unofficially to live within the contaminated zone. Most of those evacuated received radiation doses of less than 50 millisieverts, although a few received 100 millisieverts or more. So, compared to the Fukushima Dai-Ichi, the dose of radiation was higher, far higher in Chernobyl than in Japan. A criterion of 350 millisievert projected lifetime radiation dose in Chernobyl. In the years following the accident, further 220,000 people were resettled into less contaminated areas, and the initial 30-kilometer radius exclusion zone of 2,800 square kilometers was modified and extended to cover 4,300 square kilometers. This resettlement was due to application of a criterion of 350 millisieverts projected lifetime radiation dose. Though, in fact, radiation in most of the affected area, apart from half a square kilometer close to the reactor, fell rapidly, so that average doses were less than 50% above normal background of 2.5 millisievert per year. Now, I'd like to explain you about the units used in radiation, gray and sievert. Conversion of gray into sievert. This is a calculation made like this. Exposure radiation in gray, this gray, times WR times addition of WT. WT is the indices of each organs of the human body. For example, we have lung, we have thyroid. For example, in thyroid, the WT will be 0.04. In lung, 0.12, the WT, the value of WT. And stomach, 0.12. Intestine, 0.12. And liver, 0.04. And skin, 0.01. And we have to add these WT, sigma, addition, to get the value of sievert. And also the WR, I didn't explain yet. WR is the type of the radiation, alpha ray, beta ray, gamma ray, neutron ray. And for example, if the decay is alpha decay, the molecule will emit the alpha ray. In this case, you have to multiply by 20 if it is an alpha ray. And if it's the beta ray, as I explained in the lecture of Fukushima Dai-Ichi, beta ray is electron radiation. Alpha ray is helium. And we have gamma, that is electromagnetic radiation, very high energy. And the neutron radiation is also very energetic, 2.5 to 21. We have to multiply depending on the type of the radiation. If it's gamma is 1 times, and beta 1 times. So after doing this calculation, then adding every values of these organs, we will get sievert, the unit of sievert. I'll explain more in details here. For example, There are different kinds of indices or indexes. And WR, different type of radiation, WR. Gamma, X, beta rays times 1. This is the proton radiation. It's two times. Alpha and ion, 20 times. And a neutron ray, 2.5 to 21, depending on the fluxes. And to get the sievert, you calculate adding every WT of each organ, just like marrow, intestines, lung, stomach, breast, 0.12. And glandulas, reproductive glandulas, 0.08. Bladder, esophagus, liver, thyroid, 0.04 times. And bones, brain, salivary gland, skin, 0.01 times. And total of other organs times 0.12. So adding every these WT and multiplying these different kind of rays, so you can get the final grade 2 sievert values. Now let's see about the effects of radioisotopes on humans. The main elements that are considered in low-level radiation studies and calculations are iodine-131, strontium-89, strontium-90, barium-140, with half-lives of 28 years, 50 days, and 13 days, respectively. These are not the only isotopes that comprise a low-level radiation dose, but are the most common and studied isotopes because of their effects on the human body. The human body treats iodine-131 like regular iodine found in iodized salt. It directs it to the thyroid gland, raising the possibility of thyroid cancer. Strontium-89-90 takes on the characteristics of calcium, which the body directs to the bones and teeth, and is considered one of the more hazardous constituents of nuclear wastes, causing leukemia and bone cancer. So, our body recognizes this strontium-89-90. This element is a radioactive element, but our organism will absorb this strontium-89 because it is very similar to calcium. So that's why it is directed to the bones and teeth, and the people will be contaminated and get cancer, leukemia, or bone cancer. So dangerous. So this is a paper presented by Vladimir Drozdovich, and the title is Radiation Exposure to the Thyroid After the Chernobyl Accident. And this is, he is with the Division of Cancer Epidemiology and Genetics, National Cancer Institute, Bethesda. And this is the journal of Frontline Endocrinology of January 5th, 2021. You should take a look in more details here in this article. So I will speak a little bit about that. In introduction, this Drozdovich Vladimir says that the Chernobyl accident resulted in a considerable release of radioactivity to the atmosphere, particularly of iodine-131, with the greatest contamination occurring in Belarus, Ukraine, and western part of Russia. And he used the following material and methods: increase in thyroid cancer and other thyroid diseases incidence in population exposed to Chernobyl fallout in these countries was the major health effect of the accident. Therefore, a lot of attention was paid to the thyroid doses, mainly the iodine-131 intake, during 2 months after the accident. This paper reviews thyroid doses, both individual for the subjects of radiation epidemiological studies and population average doses. Exposure to iodine-131 intake and other exposure pathways to population of affected regions and the Chernobyl cleanup workers, liquidators, are considered. As a result, he says, individual thyroid doses due to iodine-131 intake varied up to 42 gray and depended on the age of the person, the region where a person was exposed, and their cow's milk consumption habits. Population average thyroid doses among children of youngest age reached up to 0.75 gray in the most contaminated area, the Gomel Oblast in Belarus. Intake of iodine-131 was the main pathway of exposure to the thyroid gland. Its mean contribution to the thyroid dose in affected regions was more than 90%. The mean thyroid dose from inhalation of iodine-131 for early Chernobyl cleanup workers was estimated to be 0.18 gray. Individual thyroid doses due to different exposure pathways varied among 1,137 cleanup workers included in the epidemiological studies, up to 9 gray. Uncertainties associated with those estimates in terms of mean geometric standard deviation of individual stochastic doses varied in range from 1.6 for doses based on individual radiation measurements to 2.6 for modeled doses. As a conclusion, he says, the iodine-131 was the most radiologically important radionuclide that resulted in radiation exposure to the thyroid gland and caused an increase in the rate of thyroid cancer and other thyroid diseases in population exposed after the Chernobyl accident. So these are the references for the Chernobyl accident. You should take a look at this. And there are also some books. This is Chernobyl's Prayer, written by Svetlana Alexievich, 1997. She got the Nobel Prize in Literature writing this book in 2015. And we also have Fallout, a journey through the nuclear age from the atom bomb to radioactive waste of Fred Pierce, 2018. This is also a very informative book. So now let's go to another country. This is the United States nuclear accident, the 3 Mile Island accident. You should take a look at this video also. it's very informative. 3 Miles Island, the nuclear power plant accident, happened on March 28, 1979. The 3 Mile Island Unit 2 reactor near Middletown, Pennsylvania, partially melted down on March 28, 1979. This was the most serious accident in United States commercial nuclear power plant operating history. Although its small radioactive releases had no detectable health effects on plant workers or the public. Its aftermath brought about sweeping changes involving emergency response planning, reactor operator training, human factors engineering, radiation protection, and many other areas of nuclear power plant operations. It also caused the NRC to tighten and heighten its regulatory oversight. All of these changes significantly enhanced United States reactor safety. A combination of equipment malfunctions, design-related problems, and worker errors led to 3 mile-second partial meltdown and very small off-site releases of radioactivity. So this is the summary of events, animated diagram of the sequence of events. The following animated diagram graphically depicts the sequence of events associated with the accident at TM 3 Mile Reactor 2. So this is the 3 Mile Reactor 2. The accident began about 4 a.m. on Wednesday, March 28, 1979, when the plant experienced a failure in the secondary non-nuclear section of the plant here, one of 2 reactors of the site. Either a mechanical or electrical failure prevented the main feed water pumps, component 1 in the animated diagram. It's not so animated, but anyway, from sending water to the steam generators, this is the steam generators that remove heat from the reactor core. This caused the plant's turbine generator for this turbine generator, and then the reactor itself to automatically shut down. So then happens the loss of coolant accident. Immediately, the pressure in the primary system, the nuclear piping portion of the plant shown in orange, began to increase. In order to control that pressure, the pilot-operated relief valve opened. It was located at the top of the pressurizer. The valve should have closed when the pressure fell to proper levels, but it became stuck open. Instruments in the control room, however, indicated to the plant staff that the valve was closed. As a result, the plant staff was unaware that cooling water in the form of steam was pouring out of the stuck open valve. As alarms rang and warning lights flashed, the operators didn't realize that the plant was experiencing a loss of coolant accident. Too late to recognize it. Low water level in the pressure vessel. So, other instruments available to plant staff provided inadequate or misleading information. During normal operations, the large pressure vessel that held the reactor core was always filled to the top with water. So, there was no need for a water level instrument to show whether water in the vessel covered the core. As a result, plant staff assumed that as long as instruments showed that the pressurizer water level was high enough, the core was properly covered with water too. That wasn't the case. Unaware of the stuck-open relief valve and unable to tell if the core was covered with cooling water, the staff took a series of actions that uncovered the core. The stuck valve reduced primary system pressure so much that the reactor coolant pumps started to vibrate and were turned off. The emergency cooling water being pumped into the primary system threatened to fill up the pressurized completely, an undesirable condition, and they cut back on the flow of water. Without the reactor coolant pumps circulating water and with the primary system starved of emergency cooling water, the water level in the pressure vessel dropped and the core overheated. So the accident happened. The NRC conducted detailed studies of the accident's radiological consequences, as did the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Health, Education and Welfare, now Health and Human Services, the Department of Energy, and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Several independent groups also conducted studies. There are approximately 2 million people around 3 Mile 2 during the accident are estimated to have received an average radiation dose of only about 1 millirem above the usual background dose. To put this into context, exposure from a chest X-ray is about 6 millirem, and the area's natural radioactive background dose is about 100 to 125 millirem per year for the area. The accident's maximum dose to a person at the site boundary would have been less than 100 millirem above background. Nowadays, we do not use a millirem unit. And I suggest that you study about this. What is millirem? And what is the conversion to sievert or to gray? In the month following the accident, although questions were raised about possible adverse effects from radiation on human, animal, and plant life in that 3 Mile area, none could be directly correlated to the accident. Thousands of environmental samples of air, water, milk, vegetation, soil, and foodstuffs were collected by various government agencies monitoring the area. Very low levels of radionuclides could be attributed to releases from the accident. However, comprehensive investigations and assessments by several well-respected organizations, such as Columbia University and the University of Pittsburgh, have concluded that in spite of serious damage to the reactor, the actual release had negligible effects on the physical health of individuals or the environment. It's a little bit questioning. And what was the impact of the accident? A combination of personnel error, design deficiencies, and component failures caused the 3 Mile accident, which permanently changed both the nuclear industry and the NRC. Public fear and distrust increased. NRC's regulations and oversight became broader and more robust, and management of the plants was scrutinized more carefully. Careful analysis of the accident's events identified problems and led to permanent and sweeping changes in how NRC regulates its licensees, which in turn has reduced the risk to public health and safety. So this is the good side. And here are some of the major changes that have occurred since the accident at the 3 Mile. Upgrading and strengthening of plant design and equipment requirements, identifying the critical role of human performance in plant safety led to revamping operator training and staffing requirements. enhancing emergency preparedness, including requirements for plants to immediately notify NRC or significant events and an NRC operations center staffed 24 hours a day. And the current status, how it is running now. Today, the TMI-2 reactor is permanently shut down and 99% of its fuel has been removed. The reactor coolant system is fully drained and the radioactive water decontaminated and evaporated. The accident's radioactive waste was shipped off-site to an appropriate disposal area, and the reactor fuel and core debris was shipped to the Department of Energy's Idaho National Laboratory. In 2001, First Energy acquired 3 Mile 2 from GPU. First Energy has contracted the monitoring of 3 Mile 2 to Exelon, the current owner and operator of 3 Mile 1. The companies plan to keep the 3 Mile 2 facility in long-term monitored storage until the 3 Mile 1 plant ceases operation, at which time both plants will be decommissioned. So this is the chart of the 3 Mile nuclear reactor plant diagram. This is a reactor building with pressurized relief tank, pressurized relief valve, block valve, safety valve, pressurizer, this steam generator, and this is the reactor core. These are the control rods. This is the reactor coolant pump. This is the primary reactor, and this is the secondary, non-nuclear reactor. Turbine building, this. Turbine, condenser, generator. This is the condensate pump. This is the main feed water pump. And then away from these reactors, we have circulating water pump. This is a cooling tower, and this is a transformator. The reference for the 3 Mile Island are here, and I suggest that you should watch them. Okay. Now let's see to another country also, France. 58 atomic power plants. So many. After United States, France has the second biggest nuclear power plants. Hardly any country seems to love atomic energy more than France. It's the world champion of nuclear power and generates around 75% of its electricity in nuclear power plants. Warnings about potential risks tend to fall on deaf ears. In some cases, just getting involved in protests against nuclear involves its own risks. Jean-Paul Simon is a farmer from Safontaine who ended up in court because he lent farming equipment to people protesting against nuclear power. He was arrested. The farmer's equipment was seized by authorities. Jean-Paul Simon is still waiting for its return. He's just a farmer, but it is because he was helping the people against nuclear power. And now let's see about the Fessenheim plant. This is a French nuclear power plant, but the name is German. The country's oldest power plant is in Fessenheim on the border to Germany. That's why the name is German. The Fessenheim plant has been involved in more incidents than any other in France, but the residents seem largely untroubled. And apart from plans to distribute iodine pills and information leaflets that look pretty out of date, the city appears to be ill prepared to cope in the event of a serious accident. How come France has such faith in nuclear power? So, to discover this, I suggest that you watch this video, Atom Mon Amour, France's Faith in Nuclear Energy. And this documentary takes in viewers across the country and features both supporters and opponents. It takes a look at how in France, children appear to be raised to take atomic for granted. Nuclear power plants near the Loire River, for example, organize children's activities such as candle making in the shadow of the cooling towers. Now, let's see the case in the United Kingdom, England. The wind scale 5 of 1957, an old one. This marked Great Britain's largest nuclear reactor disaster, ranking level 5 classification on the International Nuclear Event Scale. The Chernobyl and Fukushima Dai-Ichi was level 7, as you know. During World War II, the Manhattan Project, as a defense against Germany, ignited the United Kingdom's involvement in nuclear fission as a military weapon. The Manhattan Project was a collaborative effort from United States, United Kingdom, and Canada. When World War II ended, the United States closed their nuclear weapon program to other countries. In an attempt to maintain their position as a world power, the United Kingdom expedited their research and technology to build their own nuclear weapon project. Thus, in 4 short years, 2 wind-scale piles were built in Cumbria, New England. Each pile was housed separately in large concrete buildings as a couple hundred feet apart. Additionally, they were fueled by 180 tons of uranium metal. The reactors manufactured plutonium used for nuclear weapons, as well as the polonium and tritium used as fission triggers. These are the 2 towers of wind-scale piles, Cumbria, New England. And about the accident, the fire. On October 7, 1957, a routine heating of wind-scale pile 1 began using the Wigner approach of annealing the reactor core. Next, the power was increased to further raise the temperature. However, instead of a gradual release of energy, the high temperature caused the buildup of energy to be stored in the core. In hopes of accelerating the Wigner process, the operators increased the power even more. Due to poor placement of reactor 1's thermometers, the operators couldn't get a read of the core's highest temperatures, causing operators to be unaware of the dangerously high temperature. This led to the temperature to exceed the maximum of 400 degrees centigrade. On the morning of October 10th, operators noticed the extreme condition and proceeded to venture to the charge phase in protective gear to secure the inspection plug. By this point, the operators detected the fuel channels, a bright red that soon turned into flames, scorching the graphite and the metal aluminum casing around the rods. In an attempt to fix the situation, the operators turned the cooling fans to high. Instead of extinguishing the fire, this only fanned the flames. At this point, 21 out of 53 channels were filled with fires. Efforts to discharge the burning cartridges into the water duct were unsuccessful. Operators continued their attempts to diminish the flames with liquid carbon dioxide. Finally, shutdown fans were turned off and water slowly doused away the flames. At around 3 p.m., the water was turned off after the fires completely subsided and the reactors were cooled. No one in the area, despite the release of radioactive contamination. Filters on top of the piles prevented some radiation from escaping. And what was the cause of the fire? Shortly following the disaster, an investigation took place over the next 10 days. Scientists immediately came up with 3 possible causes of the fire. The graphite itself, a burst uranium cartridge, a tritium cartridge. Upon further investigation, they concluded that the real issue was human error. The operators made a fatal mistake while performing the Wigner energy method. This process, discovered by Hungarian physicist Eugene Wigner, was a cycle of controlled heating, called annealing cycle, to capture the energy inside the reactor. This controlled heating proved successful and was deemed safe if done correctly. However, the operators that caused the wind scale fire failed to acknowledge that the temperature was dropping as it should. Thus, the second heating should not have occurred. Additionally, the operators increased airflow on both October 8th and October 10th in response to the temperature rise. Instead of proceeding to the next phase in the controlled heating, it only fanned the flames. The Wigner energy method is a process that is taken on a case-by-case. Furthermore, it is a complicated process that was left in the hands of junior staff who lacked the proper knowledge and training to handle an unforeseen situation, such as the overheating that occurred. So, it is so terrible. Additionally, the thermometers were not placed in the accurate place to measure the heat at its highest temperature. Later research found out that 2 thermometers were not even working properly. It was broken. So, let's see about the radiological impact. Following the fire, environmental measurements were taken to determine the radiological impact of the disaster. The measurements showed that the event led to the atmospheric dispersion of radioactive materials throughout England and Wales and parts of Northern Europe. The results indicated the highest concentrations of emitted fission products to be iodine-131 and cesium-137. Of the two, the bigger focus was on the iodine-131 in examinations of the hazardous consequences of the fire. It was found that the total amount of iodine that could have been emitted totaled 7,000 terabecquerel, but the actual amount of emitted reactive and particulate iodine-131 was 1,800 terabecquerel. If cows graze on grass that's been contaminated by iodine-131, the radioactive material can easily be absorbed by the human thyroid gland upon consumption of cow's milk. Thus, the government instituted a milk ban in the surrounding wind scale areas, ranging from 10 kilometers north of the piles to 20 kilometers to the south. This proved to be a good decision, as the thyroid dose levels would have been higher than the safe threshold without it. There are several estimates for the level of cesium-137 that was emitted, and these values range from 90 to 350 terabecquerel. The cesium-137 would have been released in the form of particulates, and air filters were used to sample the data. Other techniques also included measuring activity in fuel and estimated release fraction. Aside from cesium-137 and iodine-131, it was estimated that 3,000 to 5,000 terabecquerels of tritium, 14 to 110 terabecquerel of polonium-210, and 0.003 to 0.1 terabecquerel of plutonium-239 were released. So it was a very dangerous accident also. This is the references, An Atomic Empire, a Technical History of the Rise and Fall of the British Atomic Energy Program. World Scientific, 2013. And another videos about the wind scale, Britain's biggest nuclear disaster, brief history, and the wind scale 5. The last one is in the Soviet Union at that time. Kishtim disaster, causes, concealment, revelation, and facts. This is from Britannica. Kishtim disaster is an explosion of buried nuclear waste from a plutonium processing plant near Kishtim, Chelyabinsk Oblast, Russia, on September 29, 1957. This was not a disaster on the nuclear power plant, but in the processing plant of the nuclear waste. Until 1989, the Soviet government refused to acknowledge that the event had occurred, even though about 9,000 square miles, 23,000 square kilometers of land were contaminated. More than 10,000 people were evacuated, and probably hundreds died from the effects of radioactivity. After details became known, the International Atomic Energy Agency classed the Kishtim disaster as a level 6 accident on the International Nuclear and Radiological Event Scale. So, this is written by the Rabo Thomas, the nuclear disaster of Kishtim, 1957, and the politics of the Cold War. This is in the Journal of Environment and Society portal, Arcadia. Rachel Carson Center for Environment and Society. In the late afternoon of 29 September 1957, residents of the Chelyabinsk district in the southern Urals noticed unusual bluish-violet colors in the sky. The regional press speculated about polar lights appearing exceptionally far south. However, within a few days, a slew of government activity became evident around the military area that housed the nuclear facility Mayak. Peasants were required to slaughter their livestock, bury their crops, and plow their farmland. More than 20 villages comprising over 11,000 people were evacuated and completely demolished. No official statement was given about any of these orders, but everybody could figure out for themselves that a major accident had happened at Mayak. This is the picture in Mayak. It was established in 1946, and by 1949, it had produced the first Soviet nuclear bomb, After this initial success, Moscow demanded ever more bombs and allowed ever less time to make them. Mayak delivered, but it paid a price. As a result of disregarding basic safety standards, 70,245 workers received radiation overdoses between 1948 and 1958. Dumping of radioactive waste into the nearby river from 1949 to 1952 caused several breakouts of radiation sickness in villages downstream. Residents of the area were thus familiar with the invisible dangers coming from the secret site. These are the caused by the contaminated river Techa. And where is it located? Here, Mayak. This is Russia. Here is Mayak. Here. And this red area is the contaminated area. So let's see about the radioactivity of Mayak. This time, however, radioactivity descended on people and places without any obvious pattern. So what had happened? The cooling system of a cistern containing radioactive waste had failed, and nobody had noticed. The waste started to heat up, eventually exploding at a temperature of 350 degrees Celsius. The 160-ton concrete cover burst, flinging 20 million curies of radioactive material into the sky, where it was scattered by the wind. It settled over an area of 20,000 square kilometers, home to 270,000 people. It was impossible to keep information about the disaster from leaking out, at least in the surrounding area. The Western world, though, came to hear about it only in 1976, when Soviet immigrant Zhores Medvedev first revealed some facts about the catastrophe. So now let's see about the Kishtim disaster more deeply. The CIA had known about it long before. By 1960, its network of informants and aerial spy photos had provided it with a clear picture of what had happened. Those documents were later published, but long kept away from the public so as not to put the image of the emerging nuclear industry at risk or cause people to ask questions about safety issues at the US government's own harmful nuclear site. Indeed, government laboratories even put out statements downplaying Medvedev's accounts of the seriousness of the Kishtim incident. Moscow, of course, was delighted. Thus, the Kishtim disaster also tells a story about the Cold War's occasional absurdities. The CIA actually helped the Soviet Union keep its first nuclear catastrophe a secret until 1989. Because the United States wanted to put this harmful nuclear site in progress, producing nuclear bomb. Now let's see a little bit about the nuclear waste in the United States. Today, nearly 70,000 tons of nuclear waste sits outside nuclear power plants across the country. For the last half century, scientists and politicians have struggled to create a viable solution for permanent waste disposal at Yucca Mountain, located 90 miles outside Las Vegas. They've failed. As the political dust settles over Yucca, eyes turn to the waste isolation pilot plant outside of Carlsbad, New Mexico. And what happens to nuclear waste? I suggest that you watch this video. It's very important. Nuclear waste is an extremely dangerous substance and must be disposed of by professionals, dressed head to toe in safety gear. But how do they actually get rid of nuclear waste after a major accident like Chernobyl? In this video, we can find out how radioactive nuclear chemicals are actually disposed of without contaminating everything and everyone around. And at last, we have Onkalo. This is the only country that has the nuclear waste disposable land. Finland's 100,000 year nuclear tomb. And also another interesting informative videos are here. Sweden, how it deals with the radioactive waste, how bad is really nuclear technology, facts and feelings. Sanjiva Rose at TEDx Oslo. Also in Japan, we do not have the place to the nuclear waste disposal. We do not have. It is still accumulating with plutonium and every dangerous radioactive elements. About the Sanjiva Rose. Sanjiva Rose is a Norwegian physicist and has her own blog. She's doing a PhD in nuclear energy at the University of Oslo, where she is currently focusing on the use of thorium in nuclear power stations. In her spare time, she's blogging about nuclear energy research, fashion, interior design, and her daughter. This year, she also was representing the student candidate for the president's office at the University of Oslo. In this video, she will talk about how media's coverage of the risk of nuclear energy is wrong. And at last, we have this reference for the nuclear waste. This is about the legacy of Goiânia radioactive source accident thrown by the hospital. A brief history of the Goiânia incident in Brazil. This is also the short documentary on the radiograph machinery of a hospital illegally thrown in the land. Becquerel and sievert. What is the difference? And the effect of a human population living near of the nuclear waste. So that's all for today. Thank you for your patience. I recognize that it was a very, very long lecture, but I think that it was fruitful and very tiresome, maybe, for you. So stay healthy and bye for now. Bye-bye.